Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Blake, what you've pulled off with your rental properties is really pretty amazing. Tell us what you've done.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on. Really, I got serious in 2016, went from 0 to 80 units, with a quickness. At the end of, 2019, I had accumulated over 300 single-family homes. Ended up, being a very stressful oversight of all those units. Ended up getting like an eye twitch, at the time, just from all the stress. But when 2020, when all the prices shot up, ended up selling off a couple hundred of those units. That left me debt-free on the remaining ones and with millions left over.
So you sold about half of your portfolio, and then you used that money to pay off the other half?
Exactly, and still ended up having an excess of seven figures after that.
Incredible. Is it less stressful now having a smaller portfolio, which you still have a big portfolio, but is it a lot less stressful?
It's so much better. So much better. I can tell you that, my stress levels are less than a third of what they were.
I think what Blake pulled off is absolutely genius, and it's put him in a very good financial situation. Now, obviously, Blake did this at a very high level, but I think at a more basic level, you could buy 2 rental properties, wait for them to appreciate, sell off one of them, and then use that profit to pay off the other property. So on the podcast today, we're going to walk through how Blake did this, how he sold off his properties, and what his life looks like today, having 145 paid off rental properties. Joining us on the show today from Davenport, Iowa, is Blake Selby. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Blake. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. If you're too busy to cook, but you still want to make sure you're eating right, check out Factor. I've been using Factor for about 1.5 years now. It's so easy. Every week they send me a big box that has all my meals for that week. Everything is fresh. It's chef prepared, dietitian approved, and ready to eat. There's no trips to the grocery stores, no chopping, no cutting. The only thing I need to do is heat it up and dinner is ready. They have a big list you can pick from with all your meals for that week, so you're not going to get sick of eating the same thing over and over again. And everything is ready to eat in just 2 minutes. They also have breakfast and lunch options. Everything is totally customizable to your needs. Head to factormeals.com/RIP50 and use code RIP50 to get 50% off. That's code RIP50 at factormeals.com/RIP50 to get 50% off.
Rental Income Podcast.
Blake, it sounds like you really had an incredible first year buying rentals. Did you know a lot about rentals when you first got started?
Zero. Believe it or not, I had just finished up selling a fitness center. That was my first business, and I knew nothing about rentals other than, paying rent at the, for the fitness facility. So it's a big learning curve.
You got started and you bought 80 properties that first year.
Yeah.
What made you want to go so big? A lot of people might buy 1 or 2 their first year. What made you go to 80?
Yeah, I think at the time I certainly had a very aggressive kind of mindset where it's like, okay, I need to make this happen and I need to make it happen now.
Okay.
Right. And I was able to lean on some people like a banker that had gone to my gym, allowed me to get a big line of credit. I was fortunate back then. There were a lot more sellers willing to be flexible with terms as well than there are probably today. So I kind of had the best of both worlds, and the prices were low. They were more affordable, and barrier to entry was lower.
Was there a certain type of property that you were buying?
At the time, I tried everything. Had a strip mall, apartment buildings, single family homes, duplexes, triplexes. I just kind of tried everything, and I didn't narrow it down until maybe a couple years later.
So if you found a deal, you would just buy it.
Exactly. If it made sense to me at the time, which was kind of a scary thought.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Looking back on it now, is there a certain type of property that's done best?
I think the single family homes by large have been my best performers. That's not to say that that's the best asset class. I think it was the best for me where I was.
And is there a certain type of property, like a certain bedroom combination or a certain type of neighborhood?
Yeah, the ones that I've had the least struggle with are any house that's purchased for over 100,000.
Over 100. Okay.
Anything under 100,000 gives me a lot of headaches. And also, without getting into the weeds too much, if you have a $5,000 maintenance expense on a $200,000 house, who cares?
Right.
Right. But if you have that same expense on a $40,000 house, you've got a problem.
Right. Right. So when you were buying properties, were you buying, you're buying so many properties in such a short period of time. Were these properties generally rent ready, or were you doing rehabs after you bought them?
Most of them, Dan, I had to do significant repair to.
Okay.
So these were, distressed. They were always a distressed sale of some sort. And I always seemed to have to get, my claws into them and get workers over there and get work done. So, I mean, it was very intense. None of them were ready to go.
Okay. So your portfolio ended up being about 300 units that you bought in about 3 years.
Yeah, I would say about that amount of time.
So walk me through the stress that you were feeling. So you were buying just property after property after property, and
right.
Like, how are you managing them and dealing with the rehabs and dealing with the repairs? Like, did you build like a whole team to work with you?
I did. I had a whole, first of all, I had a whole contractor crew, about 13 guys that would show up at, 7:00 in the morning, and I'd play whack-a-mole with the maintenance, telling them, hey, you go here. And then I have a support staff, admin staff, which I still have. But we no longer do our rehabs in-house. We outsource all that.
And it was just nonstop. Like, you just had a lot of issues coming up that you had to deal with every day. Because you mentioned it was really stressful, and you developed an eye twitch. Like, was it just unbelievable stress?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was getting hundreds of phone calls and texts a day. Just every single one of them was some kind of a problem that needed delegated. I always seemed to be understaffed, didn't have enough workers, didn't have enough money, didn't have enough X, Y, and Z. I was always short on resources. So I was trying to make a tightrope out of twine, and I did, but it was, the process to get there was not ideal.
Do you think it was because you grew so fast? Like, if you had bought 300 properties over maybe 10 years, do you think it would have been easier to manage? Or do you think that number of properties with the type of properties you were buying was just a recipe for disaster?
With the pace that we grew, it allowed me to see patterns very quickly. Mm-hmm. And that was the one upside to growing so fast, is that I could quickly identify patterns, quickly identify what wasn't working, because I had so much scale that if it wasn't working in a big way.
Right, right. Now, I'm just thinking that if in that time frame I wanted to buy 300 properties, I would have had a hard time finding those properties and then also dealing with the management. Like, how did you find so many deals in such a short period of time?
Finding the deals, actually, I would say it wasn't the hardest part of it. So I think that finding the deals had more and all to do with me just taking a bunch of shots, right? So you take a bunch of shots and you're going to land a few of them, right? Mm-hmm. But I was just, we were going hard on direct marketing. We were going hard on, cold calling. We were going hard on everything. And, that was basically what led us to get a lot of at-bats. And then, if you get enough at-bats, you're going to get some deals, right? You don't need that. If you're taking 1,000 shots and you land 10, you don't have to do that. a handful of times before you've got 100 units.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So you get the 300 units. And then when did you say this is crazy? I can't keep this up.
The whole time.
The whole time. So then what happened? Like, how did you get the idea that, wow, like these things have appreciated. I could probably sell some of these off and pay off the others.
Yeah, I think the big moment was probably at the beginning of 20 when the house prices, of course COVID was there, but the house prices just shot up. I mean, it was stuff I was paying, it was going up 40%. I mean, it was just crazy. There were lines, we had lines out down the way when we were renting something, we had lines down the way, and it was just crazy to see the amount of interest and the demand for housing that had gone up. And a lot of these I bought in, 16, 17. I mean, and I just saw this. I was like, wait a second, there's an exit play here. And I was getting really stressed out to the point where, I just, with having millions in debt, which I had at the time, and having to do all this and trying to, squeeze blood out of a turnip, I said, it would be better for me to be a smaller fish and be healthy than to be as big of a fish as I was. So that's what I chose. I chose the healthier route, and I'm glad I did.
And what's funny is like you're still a big fish. I mean, having over 100 rentals, like that's still a huge portfolio.
Sure.
Like, so with all the debt that you had, like, was that stressful? Like just having millions of dollars in debt?
And I was lucky enough to get pretty low interest debt. I mean, most of my debt was under 6%.
Okay.
And so that was good. I think I was somewhere between like 3 and 6 on a lot of my debt. And so, I mean, we had some seller finance debt situations where it was, almost 0% interest. We went as sometimes no interest, which isn't, easy to come by, but, overall the debt wasn't high interest, but, a lot of it had balloon dates on it.
Right.
And for those who don't know what that is, that's when you have to, that's a cutoff, that's a hard deadline that you have to pay it back by, or get a refi by. And if you don't do that, they can just, foreclose. So,
right. Well, was it difficult getting so many loans in such a short period of time? Like were the lenders like, hey, Blake, what are you doing here? You've got 100 houses that you bought. Did you have a tough time financing?
Yeah, I did. I in the beginning, it was a little easier getting started. It seemed like the first 10 weren't really a big issue. And then it seemed like as soon as I wanted to go get some scale, all the bankers were like, whoa, slow down. You don't have, they weren't doing a lot of DSCR loans, debt service coverage ratio loans back then, or at least I couldn't find a lot of people. I did find some folks that were doing portfolio loans. So that went well. But I definitely think that it got harder as I went on, and the more debt I had, the harder it became to convince, bankers, especially traditional bankers. I had to rely a lot on seller financing and other, avenues.
Now, as far as selling the properties off, how did you decide which properties to sell and which ones to keep?
Not going to lie to you, I pretty much listed everything.
Oh, okay. And see what you got the offers on.
Yeah, I was like, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. So,
was it hard to sell that many properties?
It was. In fact, I had to sell some larger packages off I had to offer seller financing, terms on some of them. And a lot of times I was just getting a big, juicy enough down payment, just enough to clear the debt that I had on the property. Right. So I wasn't, always making money right away. So I was more so doing a debt clear down. And then, eventually, and I had balloons for those people, and then eventually they paid me off on the balloons. But it was some of my sold cash, some of my sold on terms, but I was able to get enough to knock out all the debt and then still have, millions left over.
And the money that you made on the properties, was this from the market appreciating, or was it also from you buying below market value?
What do you mean by that?
Like when you were buying a property, say the market value is $100,000. Were you buying that property at $100,000, or were you buying that property at maybe $70,000?
The one thing I always did right was, even when I didn't know what I was doing, was I always bought low.
Okay.
I always made my money on the buy, and that's what saved me in the end. That was my salvation. If I had bought anywhere near market rate, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Okay. All right. So you were buying right, buying below market, and then when that appreciation hit in 2020, you just capitalized on that and
Absolutely.
sold off. All right. So you listed everything. And what about getting the tenants out? Like, did the tenants need to leave, or did you find other investors to sell it to that would take the lease?
I was super grateful that I was able to sell to a lot of investors. Obviously there were some individual sales like to regular homeowners, but in most cases the tenants were able to stay and they had transferable leases. Mm-hmm. So that was a blessing, especially when I was selling off some of them in large groups. Like I remember one day I sold like 74 of them, in one day. And that really helped out. So I was able to, unload them in groups. I think one was like a 34 pack. One was a 74 pack. I had another one that was like a 30 pack. And so by kind of moving them in packs, I was able to, kind of sell to landlords and other investors and keep the tenants without having to do mass evictions or anything like that. So, which that would have been not fun.
What about the taxes? Because I got to imagine that you, with all the profit you're making, you probably got hit with a huge tax bill.
Massive.
Massive. Was that just painful?
It was, I did a 1031 exchange in like 2017, and I didn't really like it, to be honest, because it really just kicks the can down the road.
Right.
You're deferring the gain. You're not eliminating the gain, right? Yeah. Which is that, for those who don't know what a 1031 is, basically it's called a like-kind exchange, and you have 90 days to identify a property and another 90 days to execute on the purchase of it. It's very complicated. It's not free to do. It costs money. So for me, and then it puts you in a bind where you're in this time crunch to find another asset that, maybe you wouldn't, or it wasn't that good of a deal anyways. You're just doing it to not pay the tax man. And quite honestly, I think it's better just sometimes just to pay the taxes. And then know it's paid, it's done with. And I'm still paying 6-figure tax bills every year. And people are like, oh, I don't pay any taxes. If you don't pay any taxes, you're either Elon Musk or you don't know what you're doing, right?
Right,
I mean, it's just, to me, it feels like, and I've read some really good books. Actually, on your website, you've got one of those, books, the Rich Dad Tax Advisors, know what I mean? That you had listed. And I've read that book, and I have some books on how to pay very little taxes. But what I have seen is when you're having many cash events, I would call them cash events, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're buying low and you sell high and you take the cash. Okay, you're going to have some capital gains. Sure, you're going to pay some out. But when you're moving at that rapid of a clip, if your focus is on preventing taxes, I think you're thinking wrong. You need to get more cash events, right?
Right.
So, I'm going to pay hundreds of thousands this year in gains taxes just this year, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just love your strategy. I just think this is a great way to end up with a free and clear portfolio. And if somebody did this, I mean, they could do it on a smaller scale if that was more comfortable. I mean, if you buy 10 properties and you wait for 5 of them to appreciate and you sell them off, you could pay off the other 5.
Right.
And, I just think that's really awesome. So tell me about today. So is it just way less stressful not having any debt?
It is. I mean, it's the feeling of knowing that every month, no matter what, I'm making a profit.
Yeah.
No matter what happens, no matter how poorly I perform, no matter what I miss, I make mistakes sometimes, whenever you're taking massive action, you're probably going to have some mistakes, but the mistakes are small, the losses are small, and the wins are huge.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not about being perfect on it. It's just about, having no actual, physical loans. It allows you to be a lot freer in terms of being able to make a mistake or two, and you don't have to, your margins have opened up so wide that it allows for a mistake here and there. And you don't have to be so stressed out, and you're not living, check to check, rent check to rent check, right?
Right.
So And I'm sure a lot of folks would love to, get their, loans paid down, right? I'm not unique in that way. I just happened to have, at that time, I happened to get an avenue to be able to do that.
Yeah, what a great story. 145 paid off rentals and over $1 million in the bank after everything is all said and done. I think that's a great story, and congratulations on pulling this off, Blake. A couple of my takeaways from today's interview is I think it's really great where Blake is today, but it's interesting to think about that this wasn't his plan. He didn't put together a plan to get to 145 paid off rentals. His plan was to grow a really big rental portfolio. And once he got there, he figured out that that was a lot more hassle than he anticipated. And he wanted to scale back. But all along, he had been doing things right and buying properties below market value. And then he got lucky with some really good market appreciation during the pandemic. And when you combine that, the buying properties right and some appreciation, and you multiply that over 300 properties, he's got a lot of equity there. And I think it was really smart to cash out, to sell those properties and pay off the other properties. And I think he's in a really good place today. But it's just interesting to think about that you can make a plan to do something and to get somewhere. But once you start on that road, you're going to see other opportunities and you might find a better plan. And I think that's what Blake did. The other thing that I think was great is that Blake didn't let financing stop him from buying rentals. When he ran into trouble with banks with traditional financing, he found portfolio loans. And when he found trouble with that, he started doing seller financing. So he always found a way to get the deal done. And I think that was good. And then the other thing is when he was selling his properties, he didn't cherry pick and sell his worst properties, which is, I think, what I would have done. He put everything for sale, and whatever sold and whatever he could make a profit on, he took. And he did whatever he could to make those deals work. And I think it's interesting that he was using seller financing to buy properties, and he also used seller financing to sell those properties. He got a big enough down payment to pay off his mortgage, and then he took payments from the person that was buying the property. So overall, I think it's an incredible story, and Blake ended up in an incredible position, and it's all because he took some risk and had some faith that this is going to work out. Now, what do you do when you have 145 paid off rentals? You have a ton of money in the bank. How do you keep that money growing and working for you? Well, the next thing that Blake did is he started a hard money lending business. So he takes that money and he lends it out to people that are flipping houses. He makes short-term loans and he's getting interest on those loans. So if anybody is flipping houses and you're looking for short-term financing, reach out to Blake. He'd be happy to take a look at your deal. I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 438. If you're looking for long-term financing, so Blake is doing short-term financing for fix and flips. If you're looking for long-term financing for your rentals, reach out to our sponsor, Chaley Ridge. Chaley is a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. If you want to find out more, or maybe have Chaley look at a deal that you're looking at, you can reach out to her at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. I'll be back with a new episode next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.